All right, now the dense connective tissues have a ton of either collagen or elastic fibers, mostly collagen. They have very little ground substance because there's not enough space for ground substance because there's so much collagen. And how much of which they have depends on the function of the tissues. So dense regular connective tissue makes up your tendons and ligaments. Tendons hold muscles to bone, ligaments hold bones to other bones. So these are really, really important in holding your body together and in moving the skeleton. So they need to be very, very strong, and they need to be able to pull under great stress, but they only pull in one direction. So these tissues have evolved to be very, very strong in one direction, but not in opposing directions, because they don't get a ton of stress in a different direction. So if you think about the tendons that make up your knee, most of the work they do, for example, back here, is pulling the lower leg toward the upper leg to bend your knee. It gets a lot more work that way than sideways. And so having the tissue that is very strong this way and not strong side to side is most important. So that's the trait that got passed on by evolution. So what we see when we look at these tendons and ligaments up close is we see tons and tons of collagen fibers stacked up in parallel, just stacked up next to each other. So it's very, very strong this way, but not strong this way, which is what happens when you do lots of like stepping and twisting with your lower leg, or if you get kicked on the side of the knee, suddenly this gets force to the side that can actually tear apart these collagen fibers and even tear these collagen fibers, and then you have a torn ligament. And so that's how that happens. Notice there aren't very many cells in this dense regular connective tissue, and the ones that are there are really smushed between these cells. They just look like these little dark spots that are kind of long and thin. Now, dense irregular connective tissue still has lots and lots of collagen fibers, but now it's in little bundles and they're going kind of every which way. This looks like the tidy person, who like cleans up keeps all of their stuff really tidy and organized, like they put this together. This looks like I put it together, like the person who just throws their stuff in the drawer and hopes that they can find it later. Honestly, this is me. So it's much less organized, but that gives it strength in multiple directions. So it's strong this way and this way. It's not as strong in any one direction as dense regular connective tissue is, but it's kind of strong in all directions. And so it's really important for things like your skin that gets pulled in all directions. So if you think of as you're moving your body, your skin is moving not just in one plane, but you can, for example, turn your arms in many different directions. And so your skin can move well in all of those directions because it has this layer of dense irregular connective tissue. So we see it in the dermis, which we'll get to later. We see it around cartilage and bone, providing kind of a protective layer around your bones. And a lot of internal organs have a capsule made out of this that's just a layer around the organ to sort of help the organ keep its shape and to protect it, from jostling against other things. And then we have elastic connective tissue. This is actually not a microscope slide. This is a diagram of it. And what we see is a little bit of ground substance, a bunch of cells, and tons of elastic fibers, really tightly packed. Notice that these are more tightly packed than in the reticular tissue. So if I go back to the reticular tissue there, you can see these are less tightly packed, more spaces, and there are cells in the spaces. Whereas here, There are a few cells in the spaces, but it's the the fibroblast cells for this tissue. Okay, this elastic tissue is really important because it stretches. It makes up the walls of your big arteries, your aorta, the arteries whose names you are going to learn, like the femoral artery or the brachial artery, these big muscular arteries. These arteries receive pulses of blood from the heart, and so they have to expand to accommodate that pulse, but then they need to go back to their original shape so they don't get all floppy. So that's what these are made of. They're made of these connective tissue, elastic connective tissue, along with muscle and other tissues. All right. Next up, we have another type of connective tissue, which is cartilage. Now, cartilage is a strong, kind of flexible. Different types of cartilage have different levels of flexibility. It supports body structures. It does not have vascularity. It doesn't have blood vessels. So that's why it's really slow to heal, because there's no direct blood flow to the cells in cartilage. In order to get nutrients to cartilage cells, it has to diffuse through the layers of cartilage, and that can be really, really slow. The cells in cartilage are called chondrocytes. So whenever you see this prefix, chondro, that means cartilage. So these are cartilage cells. Remember, cyte means cells. There are 3 types of cartilage. The most common is called hyaline cartilage, which means glass, because it looks sort of empty. So this is the hyaline cartilage, not this. This is connective tissue around it. This is more hyaline cartilage. It is fairly strong, but it's still the weakest type. Okay, the other types of cartilage are stronger than hyaline cartilage. But it's really useful because it's very smooth. It looks glassy under a skeleton. And so all of the articulating surfaces in your skeleton, all of the places where the ends of bones move against each other, those bone surfaces are covered with hyaline cartilage so that there's a smooth surface for those 2 bones to move past each other. So it's not actually the bone touching the bone, it's cartilage touching cartilage. Most of your fetal skeleton actually starts off as cartilage and then later develops into bones, and we'll talk a little bit about how that happens when we talk about the skeleton. There are collagen fibers in here, but they're not organized in a way that makes them individually visible. They're more sort of individually going in different directions. So there is a lot of collagen in here giving it strength, but not fibrous. Now, there is a type of cartilage called fibrocartilage that is very fibrous. Although the cells in here, the chondrocytes, look smaller, it's just because it's at a lower magnification. This is at 180, this is only at 80. So the cells in here are actually quite large. There's not a lot of ground substance. There is a lot of collagen fibers, and they're bundled together so they are visible. And you can see they're all going in one direction. So if you kind of got this mixed up with like dense regular connective tissue, like that's kind of easy to confuse. The way you can tell the difference is in cartilage, cells are in little pockets, and you can see a little pocket right here. And also see how these cells look round. They don't look all smushed like in the dense regular connective tissue. So that's how you can tell the difference. This is a really good shock absorber. So we see it in places like the knee, and the vertebral discs between vertebral bones that get a lot of pounding as you walk and run and things like that. We also see it in the pubic symphysis, which is a little disc between the 2 pubic bones at the front of the pelvis. Okay. All right, and finally we have elastic cartilage, which has, as you might imagine, lots of elastic protein fibers. The chondrocytes are often double, in like 2 in 1 pocket. And this is really, really flexible. So it makes up the epiglottis, which is a little flap in your throat that covers your windpipe when you swallow. And it makes up the external ear. So you can fold your ears and then they boink, spring back to their original shape. And that's because the elastic fibers in here can spring back to their original shape. All right, so here's a diagram showing the three types of cartilage and where they're found. So you can see the hyaline cartilage makes up the front of the nose, makes up all of these articulating surfaces where bones meet bones, but also makes up these cartilage, what we call costal cartilages, that connect the ribs to the sternum. Okay, so that's all cartilage. That enables your rib cage to change shape while you breathe. Kind of cool. Fibrocartilage makes up these intervertebral discs, the menisci in the knees, and elastic cartilage makes up the ears, and this little part of the epiglottis, that little flap right there. Notice these rings here. This is hyaline cartilage. The air tubes in your trachea and your bronchi, which are the air tubes that carry air in and out of your lungs, they're actually held open by rings of hyaline cartilage. All right, so that's that. I'm going to take another break, and then the next one we're going to talk about bone and then blood.